Good afternoon and aloha, everyone. My name is Chuck Parker. I'm the Vice President of Content here at PBS Hawaiʻi. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this exclusive event featuring a sneak preview of the PBS Hawaiʻi Presents film Infected Earth, the one you just watched. The film is also being featured on as part of our climate change initiative, Maukana Makai, our Kuleana. You can find this film on Thursday night. It premieres on broadcast, so spread the word. At 8:30 p.m. It'll also be on our YouTube channel at PBS Hawaiʻi and our website, pbshawaii.org. You can find films like this or videos about climate change resources to learn more on our website at pbs.org. Same place you can find the film, pbs.org, hawaii.org, great place. On your screen is a QR code. Please consider a gift to PBS Hawaiʻi. Thanks to viewers like you, we can continue to provide free virtual screenings like this and other events. Joining me for our session this afternoon is the man you just watched in the last hour or so, Darragh O'Carroll. He's an emergency room physician here in Honolulu. He was the host of the film. So for those of you watching, if you have any questions for us through this afternoon, please go ahead and submit them. We'll try to get to as many as possible. But I want to ask a question right off the bat, Darragh, for you. So you're, like I said, an ER physician here in Honolulu and now the host of this compelling film about the effects of climate change in Australia. So how did that come about? You're here and
Sure.
you were there.
No, great question. I guess how the idea came about even in the first place was probably back in 2017. I was reading, I think it was a New England Journal of Medicine, just a magazine, and I came across an article about how there was a malaria outbreak in this remote area of the Kenyan highlands where they hadn't had a malaria outbreak in recorded history. And the reason being is in the Kenyan highlands, they were the altitude prevented any mosquitoes from getting to that village. And so as global warming and the temperature started increasing, the territory of the mosquitoes now included that village. And so I was like, if it's in this remote little area, climate change is impacting the health of all of the citizens of this village. What else is it doing? And so, unfortunately, the more you peel back, the more you'll find. And then, what really solidified for me the way or how to tell this story was I was fortunate to be selected on Kiki Leah's return voyage, hopefully a sister canoe, of San Diego back to here on the prior worldwide voyage. And just the fact of being, taking 19 days to cross just half of the world's biggest ocean and seeing not only how big the world is, but also kind of in a sense of how we as a singular species are impacting the globe in such a huge way. And when we pulled, as they say in the mo'olelos, it's not finding the islands, right? It's pulling the islands out of the water. When that kind of came, it just was like, man, really kind of almost a very spiritual sort of feeling and experience. Like, man, we've got to tell this story somehow. And why Australia? Actually, a good Richard Scott, who unfortunately can't make it, the producer of this film, was a good family friend of my parents and us as well. And I grew up, he babysitted me once or twice, but he lives down in Australia, was actually lived for a brief time in the 80s and 90s, was playing rugby here with my father. He's actually a brother of Colin Scotts, the famous Warrior tight end, and went on to the NFL. Kind of kicked this idea to him, and he really ran with it and was like, hey, let's do this story in Australia. I know all of the territories. I know tell me the stories you want to talk about, and we can find the experts. And it just was kind of a matter of one, production convenience, and two, Richard's expertise.
Well, I like the tie too to the back to UH football. That's actually fascinating as well with Colin Scotts, who's the brother of Richard, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, extending more on this, the title. How'd you go with the title "Infected Earth"?
Yeah, was brainstorming for a while about how to combine some sort of climate and medicine themes together. And it really sort of, I think it was tying with, a couple different themes and titles, and infected really became the ideal adjective, I guess, for me, because the climate, looking at it as more of a health perspective rather than, or public health, I guess, perspective rather than just a climate perspective, kind of illustrates more that, some of the terminology I use throughout the documentary, which is, it's more than just polar bears and ice caps that are melting. We can see in the couple stories that we talked about in Australia, like now there's these irukandji jellyfish that could be down in Brisbane where they never had to deal with these irukandji jellyfish. So it's more than just a climate phenomenon; it's a health phenomenon. And as an emergency physician, I see that on a daily basis when I work. It's that you know health is the one thing that we don't appreciate until we lose it. And so I've seen many and treated many patients who were fine one moment and not fine the next. And so can we have some foresight and portray, hey, look, this isn't just climate. This is our neighbor's health. This is our health. This is everything that's changing. So that's kind of how I felt it illustrated everything.
And can you expand a little more on what you kind of briefly mentioned? Or what do you see in the ER? Or had there been any changes in what you've seen in the ER related, health-wise related to climate
Sure.
change, whether it's like heat exhaustion or other potential effects?
Yeah, one of the main things we're seeing here locally in Hawaii is and there's actually now a working climate and health working group of a multidisciplinary health professionals, social workers, physicians, nurses, public health officials, all guided by actually the Department of Health has a climate and health division now. We actually a couple of people who are working solely on this. We're seeing more rates of heat illness. Everything that comes from just heat exhaustion, where we kind of just hydrate you with maybe some IVs and you're able to go home, to the severe consequences like such as heat stroke, where maybe you've got kidney failure or you need to get into the hospital and get some dialysis. Or unfortunately, I'm sure I haven't treated somebody personally, but I know there's people who have suffered and possibly even and more than likely have even passed away from heat illness, in the last couple of years here in Hawaii. But the temperature increase in Hawaii, in the state, if you look at it, like the National Oceanographic NOAA graphs, since 1950, the temperature has increased in Hawaii by 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And growing up here, I always sort of anecdotally in the last like 5 years, Chuck, I don't know about you as the same and our viewers, but it does feel hotter. It just does. Like I don't remember it being constantly as this hot. And what we're seeing from the statistical side and the public health side of this heat here in Hawaii is that for every degree increase in wet bulb temperature, which is not just dry bulb, which is what we typically say, okay, it's 89 degrees out or it's 82 degrees out. Wet bulb includes the heat index of humidity and then also being out in the sun. And so for every just single increase in wet bulb temperature, say heat index from 95 to 96, there's an 18% increase in visits of heat illness to our emergency departments. And when you combine that with now we're dealing with COVID, which is still coming around in a cyclical sense, and the stress that it puts on our health systems. Hawaii has one of the lowest per capita intensive care unit beds per person in the United States, and it can put tremendous stress on our health system when we have these hot days. And we're seeing it, in Arizona. There's people who are falling down on the ground and getting third-degree burns, from the asphalt, and that's what a lot of the burn centers are saying now. And we're seeing, similar consequences, not third-degree burns, but we're seeing similar increase in heat and illness arrive at our hospital doors.
I'm going to acknowledge something from our viewers have said that they're having trouble hearing us. So, Darragh, you and I will speak up a little bit. Hopefully that'll
Sure.
help the problem here. So I want to expand a little bit more on that. So would it be correct to say it's like the heat intensity has increased, and the temperature up, whatever it might be, combined with humidity. So there's this intensity effect that just sort of exaggerates what happens to the body or how you're feeling. And for those who work outside on a regular basis, whether it be construction workers, road workers, even police officers for that matter, I mean, it's just sort of compounds what they go through.
Sure. Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm talking a bit louder. It's a little of both. So it's not just the probability that we're going to have higher and higher temperatures and higher humidities. It's also the max amount that we're going to get too. So I know we haven't broken the incredible amounts of max temperatures, but the chance that we're going to experience a heat wave, or the chance that we're going to have a heat index that's higher than say last August or last July, is definitely increasing. So if you look at it as the probability of having a heat wave as a bell curve, that bell curve has now gotten not just taller, but it also has gotten wider too. So that standard deviation started to get a little technical. In that middle bell curve is now broader, higher, and so there's just a higher chance that we're going to see heat illness arriving at our doors. And you touched on it too, and also the documentary. There's a couple different types of heat illness, right? There's the classic heat illness where as we age, we get decreased ability to sweat, and some of the medications that say we're taking for blood pressure or for heart failure can interfere with that as well. And so those who are most vulnerable are the very young, so newborns, and also the very old. And then also people who don't have air conditioners, who aren't able to get out of the heat, are undomiciled population, our homeless population, and people who are in housings that don't have air conditioners. And so it's really those who really are least responsible for climate change too, maybe who arguably have the lowest amount of carbon footprints, who are being impacted the most, which is what a pattern that we see across the globe too.
Here's a question, I'll just throw it out there from one of our viewers. How might changes in local climate patterns affect infectious diseases or vector-borne illnesses here?
Yeah, good question. So one of the main things that comes to mind for me is dengue. And so South America has had in the last year, so they just went through they're going through their winters, but they came off of the summer season and they had one of the worst dengue seasons they've ever experienced. We're also seeing incredible amounts of dengue in the Philippines. And I know it's been a while since Hawaii had a dengue outbreak. I think it was sometime in the 2000s in Big Island. There's about 70 or so people who were impacted. But dengue is one thing that I'd be more on my radar. And that's a feature that if you don't know to look for something, you may not look for it, right? And so now we're seeing hey, if somebody comes in, so one of the cardinal features of irukandji jellyfish sting is massive sudden onset chest pain. That's very similar to a heart attack, right? And so if somebody doesn't see the jellyfish, somebody doesn't know to look for it, somebody doesn't know to look for just like the red mark. Jamie was telling me the irukandji jellyfish, if somebody doesn't know to look for that, somebody could be treated, get an angiography, and get all this workup for something that, oh no, this is actually a jellyfish toxin. And on the topic of jellyfish here in Hawaii, I haven't spoken to any experts or marine experts here about jellyfish changes or box jellyfish changes. To my knowledge, I don't think there's any going to change in the pattern, because our temperatures of our water, at least, aren't changing rapidly enough. We've got a good current and mix. They are increasing, but the main thing, just to reiterate the answer to that question, is I would look for dengue. I'm looking for dengue on a when I do work, if somebody's got some unexplained fever and body aches that I can't explain.
Yeah, actually, that interesting timing on that is the health department did either yesterday or today put out a notice for physicians particularly to be aware, and for residents to be aware of dengue and dengue symptoms. There have been, I think, 5 or 6 cases around the state, mostly travel related. So people went to places where it's endemic, were bitten by a mosquito and they come back and they're sick. It's not endemic here, But that's the concern, that if there's start to be local spread, then that could change, and that's kind of the last thing we want with that. Another thing you mentioned in the film that I wanted to touch on a little more is this thing about the how climate change affects, if I say this correctly here, what we don't know. So the possible therapeutic elements that we have yet to discover, and you talked
Hmm.
about that a lot with the Great Barrier Reef, and
Yep.
as climate change changes things, there's things that we may not, that could help us that we may not even be able to find.
Right. No, exactly. When a part of the documentary that didn't make it to the final cut, one of the scientists had actually discovered, they had just been really excited. They came back into their research office and just discovered this brand new seagrass all the way out like in the nether reaches of the Great Barrier Reef, like a 4 to 5 hour, um, not even 4 to 5 hour. I think it was a 4 to 5 day boat drive from Cairns, where we launched, which is pretty north Queensland, and this new seagrass that nobody had ever kind of seen or heard of or experienced, and what sort of kind of chemicals or potential pharmaceuticals could be in that. And it's pretty amazing to think that we have so much technology and have explored so many areas, yet there's still a lot to discover. And Richard Fitzpatrick also mentioned that we've only sort of skimmed that surface. And what's in that other deep part, where I know it has less biodiversity, but there's still a huge amount of territory that we haven't really explored. And could there be potentially you know things that could really really save a lot of suffering, or prevent a lot of or promote a lot of good health. And that's the thing that kind of scared me when I saw the reef. And knowing that, hey, look, that sponge, that's where a spinal block type of medication came for somebody, say, who's got severe cancer, and no medication at all is going to touch that pain except this special nerve toxin that came from the sponge. Things of that nature that um, we don't automatically think about when we're losing biodiversity. But as we heard in the documentary, 40% of new medications at the moment come from either a natural product or a derivative of that product. So really important that we save these biodiverse areas. But I'm hopeful and thankful to see and to talk to these experts who are at least banking and keeping harvest of these species and this fauna and flora. So maybe future experts who haven't had the chance can discover things.
You know, the film is, centered down in Australia, but that is a very large place. There's a lot to that continent there. And how did you and Richard, who you mentioned you worked with on the film, find all these elements, all these scientists who have clearly they know what they're talking about? How did you find the ones that were featured in the film?
Yeah, good question. A lot of googling, but then also what many of them, as soon as you say, hey, look, I'm working on a project where I'm trying to link and speak about the impacts of climate on health, how sort of fired up a lot of them got. And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, if I'm free this time, come talk to us, like let me answer these questions. And then even the fire officials there, who arguably caught they caught a good amount of heat from the public due to the amount of fires that were uncontrolled for that summer in 2019. um, they were even, you'd think they'd be kind of guarded and like, oh, we don't want to talk to media or anybody, but no, they're like, come talk to us. This is something that we haven't ever dealt with, and we're concerned about it, and we need everybody's help to help us, you know, move forward and prepare for the next sort of iteration of this. And are we in a new normal? Yes, absolutely. And so let's talk about this. Let's see what we can do.
Do you know what the reception's been just in Australia to the film?
Yeah, been good. As far as I guess nobody comes out and says, "Hey, I didn't like this." But
Actually, you never know.
yeah, you never know. Yeah, if somebody does have critiques, I'd love, always welcome. Nobody's perfect, and I want to always improve. And Richard and I would always want to improve our storytelling capabilities when we can. But yeah, I'm really thankful that Qantas Air has. You can watch it on if you're on Qantas Air. It's on demand there in New Zealand Air. But yeah, it also aired on some of their kind of local ABCs or NBCs. But yeah, good reception. I think after that 2019 summer, where for 6 months the whole country, well, at least the east side was up in flames. There was a huge catalyst and a huge movement, not only socially, and that's what Will Steffen was talking about, right? The social tipping points, but also politically, there was a huge amount of influx of Green Party candidates elected into the
Hmm.
parliament. By no means a majority, but a good increase from what they've had before. Yeah, so I think it's only ringing bells that they um, are kind of in line with where the social kind of tipping point and movements are in Australia.
We got a couple more questions coming in here. So one, are there steps I should take to protect myself or my family from climate-related health risks?
Yeah, really good question. I think the one thing that we can really do on a daily basis is that I think the thing that's going to impact us right now, at least the most, is heat illness. And so making sure that obviously not leaving anybody in a car parked without AC, but knowing and realizing that, hey, look, taking stock of, hey, am I going to be outside away from water, or like, do I have a young family member who's doing 2-a-day football practices, which start right around now, right? This is summer football season. Making sure, and most coaches and school health departments are very aware of this, and probably is just repeating something that they already know and already um, practice, but it doesn't harm you to reiterate is that, like, hey, look, the heat illness aspect of climate, as I mentioned earlier in Honolulu, is we are increasing and making sure that hydration is part of every coach's impact on their players, making sure that they know that, hey, look, if they are feeling a little faint or tired, that's not something that you just push through. That's something that, hey, look, get in the shade and talk to a medical professional, or talk to the coach, talk to the medic, or to the trainer on the sideline. So those are the two things that I think impact, especially with summer coming up and summer now. Heat illness is something to keep in mind.
Another question here from Lynn Muramaru. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Lynn. How can we move from merely adapting to and talking about climate change to taking action to slow or stop it? How can we change the mindset that only governments and leaders can make change and empower every person to take steps to make the difference? So how do we get there?
Yeah, it's very tough question, and that's probably the biggest question of all. How do we make a difference and not just adapt, but actually mitigate and actually reverse this? And part of the efforts in my hopes of this story and this documentary is to pinpoint that this is not just something that we can kick the can down the road. This is not just, as I mentioned, polar bears and ice caps, which in themselves should be important, right? That unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. That's not important an issue for us to make big changes and a difference. So my hope was that impacting the health aspects would humanize this, and we always, it's similar to, unfortunately, another tragic public health aspect, gun violence, right? When there's um, a big outbreak of mass gun shootings. There are thoughts and prayers, but thoughts and prayers aren't going to fix this issue. How do we move that needle? And I think it's those social tipping points, right? And I mentioned that there's been um, the more people, or excuse me, I mentioned that there's been more political leaders being elected from the Green Party in Australia. maybe that's something that, we have elections coming up here recently, and maybe it's making sure that when we talk to our local elected officials from our, whether it be the state senate or house, or the city council, that they're aware of the consequences, and that it's important to their constituents. And so I think that's one aspect that we can take right now. But it's going to take a lot of work, because anytime you try and move the needle anywhere, doesn't matter what you're doing, when you're compromising with big oil money, right? There's a lot of money to keep going the way at stake, to keep going the way that, hey, look, let's just, keep that oven on, and we'll deal with it later. But
Well,
we
okay, I
can't deal
want
with
to
it
want to
later.
cut you off just because we got a comment from Marcia Kimball. So her comment to what you're saying sort of fits right in with that. Says, my comment about what we can all do personally to protect ourselves from the damaging effects of climate change. Vote for people who will be climate champions. Please mention that, which we just did. Thank you, Marcia, for sending that in. A question that came in actually before Marcia's comment: are there long-term health considerations that I should be discussing with other healthcare providers or specialists given climate change projections? How do we plan for changes?
It's a really good question. One of the, we in the documentary we talked about, and we visited a obstetrician, right, who talked about the consequences of smoke in the labor rooms, and smoke, especially from like wildfires here, obviously, but we can talk about that a bit later. But smoke on from Canada coming all the way down to the East Coast and into the Midwest, and even San Francisco got inundated with smoke, I think last year. Just being aware of what are the environmental and elemental factors that do contribute to my health, such as illness and air quality, and then acting on those when you do see those changes coming up in the next week or two. I think that's one of the most concrete sort of pieces of advice I could give.
So, despite the obvious negative elements tied to climate change, which you very much pointed out in the film, and we've seen in other documentaries as well, there's also hope expressed. So I wanted to ask you, so do you share that hope?
Yes, I think anytime you're speaking about medicine and humanity in general, I think there's always hope. There's always good in us, and there's always a will to do the right thing. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in and on these questions. You can see it evident right here. And one of the things that gives me the most hope is the amount of, and what we really wanted to focus on is our children. And I'm not a father yet, but many of you probably are, or mother, and the enthusiasm and how they light up and how they are standing up for, hey, look, this is our future here. That's what gives me the most hope. And really, when you talk to a group of young, I've aired this documentary once or twice at high school students and grade school students, and the amount of enthusiasm they had for this topic, and how much they knew, and how much they were for everything that the documentary stood for. And a lot of them were like, "Wow, I didn't know this. Why aren't we taught this more for those who hadn't been exposed to this sort of topic?" That's what gives me hope, is the children.
You touched on another element I wanted to bring up here in the film a little bit, but it's something that's out there in other people's minds. What role does indigenous knowledge play in shaping our future actions and attitudes about what's going on?
Critical, absolutely critical. And the the selective burning that the Aboriginal knowledge, and how they, um, for lack of a better word, manage the forests. Yeah, I mean, that could have prevented a lot of what Australia has gone through. There's also downsides to that selective burning, air quality, a constant air quality change. but you won't have this huge rush up. And they're adopting some of those same techniques in California, in certain areas, to my knowledge as well. But here in Hawaii, let's say food, for our food scarcity or food supplies here locally, what are the indigenous and local Hawaiian, let's say, food specialists, such as for taro and for fish farming, and they the amount of food that Hawaii provided for its citizens before, in the 17, 16, 1800s was enormous. And can we bring back that sort of technology? I think is something that we do need to hear and listen to more.
I like the fact that you refer to something done in the 17, 1800s as technology. We seem to have lost sight of that, over time.
Yes.
So, Darragh, tell us about any other projects you have in the works, or what you guys are trying to work on beyond Infected Earth.
Sure. Yeah, we're trying to make more episodes like this, and would love to do a Hawaii or Pacific-based, ideally both, combination episode. We have 6 or 7 different episodes that planned, and unfortunately or fortunately, fortunately from the storytelling perspective, there's no shortage of climate and health related stories, no matter what country you look at. The United States and Australia being at the forefront of maybe first world climate related consequences, but Bangladesh, one of the lowest lying countries in the world, terrible consequences going on there, from massive cholera outbreaks to salt seeping into the drinking water of the pregnant women and causing increased rates of miscarriages. And that's probably one of the more tragic signs or consequences of climate change, where the sea level rise is getting into their drinking water. Yeah, so would love any support that anybody can give, sharing this story, making sure your ohana tunes in on Thursday if they weren't able to tune in today. We'd love your support to make more documentaries and more episodes like this.
Well, I'm going to share a comment with you from another viewer, Ken Yamasaki. Excellent documentary, Ken says, and I have to echo that. That was a very well done film, Darragh. You and Richard, who's not with us, he's still in Australia doing another film, I guess. But you guys did an excellent job. We're coming to the end of the program here. I wanted to ask Darragh if you had any final thoughts you wanted to share with the people who tuned in this afternoon.
Yeah, one thing we haven't touched on was the fires, in Lahaina, that occurred almost a year ago. And the one thing that always strikes me, when you're talking about population loss or public health, and we recently went through the COVID pandemic, where I personally treated and lost many patients, is communication, and how do we communicate regarding the fire effects, or the effects of any sort of public health aspect. And growing up here, I never really understood the red flag warning. It was never, it never quantified anything to me. It's like, okay, maybe this increased fire risk. But a system, we can always learn something from our cousins in the Pacific, or humanity anywhere. And that fire system, right, that quantifies a risk. And I went and spoke to a fire scientist and talked to them about August 8th, when the fires in Lahaina started, and what was that risk when you include the massive layer of guinea grass that acted as fuel for this, and when you include wind speed, humidity, all things that we knew days in advance when they called the red flag warning. The Australian system would have classified that rating as in the catastrophic category, not just like 110, 112. The number that came out when you put all the factors into the calculator was 163. That's, our experts were saying, once it reaches catastrophic, leave the day before. So when it comes to public health and climate health, it's communication, and it's how do we convey risks, how do we convey benefits, and my goal and every public health official's goal is if we're not communicating them well, we can do it better. There's always got to be a way we can do it better so people can understand. And that was the goal of this documentary: is how do we communicate the risks of climate in ways that we can understand, and that's what we aim to do.
Thank you. Well said. So this concludes our discussion this afternoon. Thank you all for spending this time with us. We appreciate it. Again, sorry if we couldn't get to all your questions. PBS Hawaiʻi will be sending you an audience survey via email, looking for some feedback on today's event. This helps our team continue to improve our screenings. So if you have a moment, please offer your insight and feedback. Also on your screen, as I mentioned earlier, is a QR code. Please consider a gift to PBS Hawaiʻi. Thanks to viewers like you, we can continue to provide free virtual screenings and events like these going forward. To donate, simply scan the code with your phone. It will take you directly to the donate page on our website. Again, Infected Earth, the film you watched before this talk story session, premieres Thursday night on our broadcast at 8:30 p.m. And you can also watch it on our YouTube channel at PBS Hawaiʻi and website pbshawaiʻi.org. So on behalf of myself and Darragh O'Carroll, thanks for joining us, Darryl. We appreciate you being here. Mahalo and aloha.